Welcome to Castle Halloween Museum. This is the old Boggs Run School, which is on Boggs Run Road. It is a three-story brick building with gargoyles on the roof. It is now the home of the Castle Halloween Museum, which is open all year long. For appointments for tours, call 304-233-1031 or email us at castlehalloween@comcast.net. Most of the flowers now for the season have just about faded because it's just a few days away from Halloween 2012. But we are open all year long. We do our seasonal displays as well as having a permanent collection of Halloween on tap all year long. We hope that you will come visit the museum. It is an experience you will probably never have anywhere else because it is the only Halloween museum in existence. It is a true museum. We are not a haunted house. We are a social history museum, and the eye candy is absolutely delicious. Welcome to the museum. Two original paintings here are by Angel Dominguez. They are in the Diary of the Victorian Mouse. You will also find the Stonehenge one in my book on Stonehenge. And the cover here, the original photograph, is up there in the corner. Beyond here on the thing, you'll find a lot of the original voodoo flags that would have been in the family homes along here. These are all made of sequins and beaded and all hand beaded and all individual ones. These are some of the ones that we have framed up and are now on display. What you're seeing now is part of our costume exhibit. We have over 1,000 costumes in stock on exhibit here at the museum. We show most of the really interesting boxes, pre-flame proof and post-flame proof. The interesting part is when the box matches the costume itself or the character itself. A lot of the later boxes, especially with Collegeville, become very generic. You see a couple of the really big over-the-head costumes. These are really quite fun. Later on, as we go through, you'll see some of the cloth costumes and some of the crepe paper costumes that were done with using Denison's crepe paper and the accoutrements and decorations that Denison would make and sell through the Bogey Book, which cost 10 cents. One of the cloth costumes that was made and the paper decorations on it are probably sold by Denison or one of the other companies for decorative purposes, usually for invitations and stuff. But these particular paper ones were put on the cloth costume. These are two original paintings by Bonnie White. Many people are familiar with her work from the Hallmark stores and other stores where her prints and calendars and greeting cards are sold. The hair wreath is one of many that we have. As we get into the crypt, you'll see a lot more of them. These were memento moris. They would have been made of the human hair of the person who passed away, friends and relatives and whatever else. Victorian times, these were usually kept in the parlor, which was safe for good, or for when company was there, Sundays. And these would go on the mantle so that when people came to visit, they would be able to visit the entire family, even those who had passed on, through the memento mori that had been left behind. The crepe paper was sold by a company called Denison. This is one of their dresses, and you can see how it's decorated. And this is one of the aprons that they would make up using the Denison pieces and stuff like that. Unfortunately, these did not survive very well because this is done pre-deodorant and people would spill stuff on them, and they were really used for only one season, one wearing and then tossed away because they would get torn, have food spilt on them, and as I said, perspiration was another problem. This is one of my favorite sections and one of the best sections of the museum as far as I'm concerned, which is the memento mori. In here you'll find a tremendous amount of the hair wreaths, of all different calibers and sizes. This one here, it has actual birds and butterflies actually in the hair wreath, not just flowers, which was common. The hair wreaths were memento mori, memories of the dead. But they were not only just done in hair, they were done in other media like feathers, which would say our darling, which would be usually for a baby, newborn baby that died in infancy. The wax flowers, and there were other media that were done. Also, you would see things like the Victorian die cuts, which we have quite a few of. This is an interesting one because it's a group of a family. You would see a family register, like on this one over here, which would be the dates of death of the people and also small bits of hair for different members of the family. The crypt here is a combination of memento mori and Day of the Dead, the sacred and the profane, the profound and the ridiculous. We have watercolors in here. We have important pieces of memento mori, including a lot of the jewelry that we have in the case, which would show have a lot of the hair in the case, in the pieces of jewelry. But the jewelry wasn't just made in with hair. They did them in daguerre, like in the daguerreotype cases. They would do them with pictures, like in this one here, which has a photograph underneath, like the bracelet had a photograph. They did them in coal. They did them in jet. So anything basically that was black or part of the person who had passed on. You see the bracelet with the snakes on it that has been wound. So the degree and the how well the weaving was done made a lot of difference of value and collectability and survivability of those particular pieces. In here we have the many Day of the Dead pieces as well, the Mexican Day of the Dead, and at the top over here there is one of the Potter photographs, prints, surrealism at its best. But there are all different types in here. And as I said, we celebrate both the sacred and the profane. So we try to make it light and fun in here. There are certain pieces that are very scarce. The clock over here was done by the tombstone maker. It's said at the time that the person would have passed away, and you'll see within the clock part, there's all these brown pieces and stuff. This would have been leaves and stuff from the funeral, and of course, well over 100 years old, so that they've deteriorated over the years. Our Day of the Dead collection, I think, is quite fun. And also we have things like this particular piece here and the goblet that's in one of the cases are from the Skull and Crossbones Society of the Yale University. Our Pirates Bar began as a joke with one bottle of vampire wine and one bottle of hobgoblin beer. But with the proliferation of many microbreweries and companies making things for the holidays, we get a lot of different bottles with wonderful graphics on some of them. So the bar has just become overwhelming and gotten very, very big. This is the original artwork for the Killer Tomatoes. This artwork becomes what you see on the box and the actual mask there. Underneath are the different layers of how masks are made and produced. And these, like the Garfield one, becomes these here. You see how on this one the eyes aren't even cut out. It becomes a question of they have to go back and forth, make decisions on how best to produce it, and this is what eventually will come out of it. In this box, we talked about Denison. that would have the bogey books for 10 cents. Well, for another 10 cents, you could take one of their classes. Now, this is for a little tomato, but you could do it as a blueberry, you could do it as a pumpkin, and depending on how you wanted to decorate it, well, Dennison would tell you how much crepe paper that you needed to produce that particular piece so that it would fit you or whoever you were making it for. And then it was up to you to decorate it with the different decorations and stuff, how you prefer to have it. But this was the teacher's box. Another one of the crepe paper dresses, and you see the tears in them. These were never meant to last, and the fact that they have lasted and been kept is really amazing. Every single piece of these were made individually by a person, so they were so completely individualized. Face jugs were originally done for keeping moonshine in, moonshine being the devil's own drink. You had to have something scarier than the devil himself to keep him from stealing your moonshine. It was also good for the temperance people and the prohibitionists and anybody else who had designs against your moonshine. Basically, they were made in Georgia, and then afterwards they were made in other states. But they had become a complete art form, Southern art form, which is absolutely magnificent. The original ones were made with a tobacco spit glaze, but today many of the artists have just, gone through with their fancy and done all types of things from aliens to animals, all types of scary figures, a lot of snake motifs, things that would be scary or that they felt were scary. Of course, we have red glazes and blue glazes and mixed glazes, which I think is wonderful. Above, you'll see some of the faces that were done also with the pottery by the Southern potters. Some of them a mixture of non-glazed and glazed. Above that, you'll see some of the voodoo paintings that were done in Haiti. These are, we think of voodoo as being the zombie movies and all these silly stuff that comes on the movies, which are great fun, but it has absolutely nothing to do with voodoo. This is basically a case of a mixture of Catholicism and the old African religions, like the voodoo flags that we saw earlier. And then there would be pieces like this, and then the ship that's down on the other end that would have been put on the family altar. And basically this was to ask for blessings on something like with the ship. Obviously it belonged to a fisherman. He wanted to have a good catch when he went out. He didn't want to get in the middle of a storm. He wanted to get back and bring his fish in early enough to get a good price on it. He didn't want to lose a net. So all of these things were important. So these are the genuine things that people would pray for. So many families had their family altars, and this is the type of thing that it would have been on. They're all handmade. They're all very, very different, beaded, and depended on the expertise of the person who was making them. Now, there's also another legend on the face jugs. They would have, in small places, especially in Louisiana, they would put a face jug that sort of looked like a person that they knew. They would try to make it look like the person, and they would put it on the grave. And if it stayed intact for a year, it was their saying, I hope, I've gone off to a better existence. I hope you have a good life. Maybe we'll catch up with each other along the way. Down here is a Day of the Dead folk art piece done by an important American Indian artist. You'll see that has the three skeletons on the inside, Tom, Dick, and Harry. They're smoking. They're carrying radioactive waste and poison in the back with the devil. It's everything that we should not be doing, and it was a very green statement. Do this one next. This is one of the pieces we have by Tubby Brown, an artist who passed away in his 80s. He was a Georgia artist. This is one of my favorite pieces. This took him 6 months or more to carve and paint, and they say this is the largest piece that he ever did. We have other pieces by him that you'll see up above here, like the Devil Telemarketer, and the the devil weenie roasting people who have been really bad. So you find that there's a lot of interaction between Christianity and Halloween, because you have All Saints coming up. So there's this close proximity, so that the devil image is used as a someone who's doing a particular job, as well as being a comic figure, as well as being a serious figure. But Tubby Brown is one of my absolute favorite artists, and his work, I think, speaks for itself. This is some of the contemporary, when we say contemporary over the last 25, 30 years, of some of the advertising. We have a lot of advertising that we'll get to see when we get into the museum, and you'll see how the graphics have changed over the years. This is very, seasonal. It comes out 1 year, that's it. It will come out sporadically in different stores around the country. One never knows where one is going to find any of this stuff. But it's very indicative of the times, and the graphics are very, very different. Down below you'll see the Addams Family ones that were done. So the graphics can be very, very different from like a printed one to artist-drawn type of information. Also, we show in here some of the contemporary pottery and china pieces that have been made, that there is some quality items being made out there. It's not just some of the really low-end trashy pieces that one tends to see in a lot of the stores. The hard plastic pieces were made basically by a company called Rosen out of Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Today the company is called Roseboro. They are still making hard plastics. Many other companies are making hard plastics, and it's being made, a lot of it is being made in China today. We do warn people that these are probably the most overpriced things on the market. They also have been Mickey Moused and tampered with, and wheels put on pieces, and colors changed and reproduced. So you have to really know what you're doing on these particular pieces. We've seen contemporary pieces that sell in the stores for $1 or $2, selling for like $45 because they are hard plastic. Well, 1 and 1, it does not come to 3. So has nothing to do with the fact that they're hard plastic, that they have much value. This is the scariest thing you're going to see here at Castle Halloween Museum. I hope you're duly scared.
I need to get a better view of the situation. Wow, I can see my grave from here. Much better.
The tie is a carved wooden tie made by folk artist Glenn Maynard. Andy Warhol's Dracula, signed and numbered. Vincent Price, the quintessential horror actor. As far as we're concerned, he's the best of the best. This is a still from Edward Scissorhand that is signed by him, and he's drawn a picture of himself as the devil. Some people might think, blood and gore is scary. We don't, but we certainly think that when you listen to or watch Vincent Price, that is scary. 2 original paintings by Harry Roseland. Roseland was famous for his fortune tellers. It was always the elderly, gnarled, beautiful black woman, in contrast to the Caucasian youth of the Gibson Girl era. The fortune tellers were his friends. These were people he knew at that time. And it was always a case that there was never any caricature involved, which was very refreshing for that era. This is a very early painting on wood of a gypsy fortune teller. Again, you get the reality and the beauty of the face, probably about 1800. This painting of a very spooky graveyard is one of those wonderful pieces that usually would show up on the side of a van. We don't know who the artist is, but it's just one of those wonderful pieces. I wish it was on the side of my van. Ipswich hosiery poster is interesting. This is part of the Salem Witch section of our museum. The Salem witch trials did not take place in Salem proper. They took place in Salem Village, which is Danvers, Massachusetts. The trials have absolutely nothing to do with Halloween, but the witch motif is what we carry. All of the witches were brought in from different places, and one of them came in from Ipswich. You notice there is no T in the word witch. So it's a play on the word, and also taken from the fact that the witch that came from Ipswich had a little bit of red on her garter. We also have the original stockings and box that Ipswich would use to sell, and of course these are from an era that we would never wear that type of thing today. Can you imagine anyone wearing stockings like this hosiery today? But these were the stockings that were sold by Ipswich Hosiery. Most of the celluloid figures were made by a company called Viscaloid out of Leominster, Massachusetts. The problem with the celluloids were that they were so fragile, so soft, that a baby could just crush them with its little fist. What is a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old going to do with them? So they didn't produce them for very long. You'll see that there are the ones that are just in white. Those would belong to the company. They have numbers on them, and you would order from those. The order numbers, you would pick the colors that you wanted to put on them. So therefore, you would always have variations in the color, and you will see variations in some of the pieces that are here. And that's why they're so very different. These are 3 paintings by Lada Yurchenko from the Ukraine. Halloween being an American holiday, it has, within the last 20, 25 years, spread the rest of the world. So Halloween, which was not even known in other countries, people have picked up the incredible fantasy and the graphics that are possible using this fantasy. And some of the wonderful art is coming out of Europe and from the rest of the world. This painting was done in 1979. We're not quite sure why the artist did this, but it's a scene from Dracula, The Bride of Dracula, and starring Bela Lugosi. The artist is what looks like Jan Bach. A few of Alan Cunningham's pieces we have here in the museum. Great fantasy with all this fussy little wonderful detail. We have other pieces of Alan's here, and he is one of our favorite artists. The 2 art style chocolate posters are indicative of the advertising of their era. The one with the yellow background, it was done by Fern Bissell Peet, who was an important artist of her period. She did Playmate magazine, which has a lot of Halloween covers for the month of October, naturally. Her work is very collected because she did children's books and paper dolls. But this is one of a real whimsy type of thing. And you see one of the figures almost looks like it came out of a Paul McHawk's Brownie book. two wonderful pieces of advertising for Pangborn's chocolates. This is the era of cheesecake. Today we don't have that cheesecake. We have a lot of pin-up type of stuff, but it's very, very different. This is the type of thing that you would have seen very, very prominent during World War II and afterwards. It's a very refreshing type of sexy art form as opposed to, sex. It's just very alluring. None Such Mincemeat also made pumpkin. Those were the two things that the company was known for. They were out of New Hampshire. And you always see the jack-o'-lantern motif or the pumpkin motif because, as I said, this is what they produced, their two main products. Candy boxes are incredible because these were things that would be totally ephemeral but thrown away. It gives you a great understanding of the art and the thought process of the era. The graphics are so completely different than today. There's an innocence and charm about them. But one of the great things is to see the prices on how candy bars, full-size candy bars, Butterfing is 2 cents. The graphics there's a lot of charm. There's a lot of these anthropomorphic little beings. Also in here is a lot of the packaging that was used for Denison and other companies for the seals and accoutrements that were used on to make postcards, to make invitations, dance programs, and even on a piece like this, these would have been put into the cupcakes for decoration, but these will also be used on the crepe paper costumes where you would buy the crepe paper from a company from Denison's catalog, the Bogey Book. This is a small section of what we call the common room from Hogwarts. It's our Harry Potter section. Some of it is pieces that are Harry Potter collectibles, but other pieces like the large spider over here was done by a folk artist who works in agricultural pieces. A lot of the pieces are things that one might come across at Hogwarts, whether it's a werewolf or owls, or spiders. It's certainly the spiders loom large in the Harry Potter stories. More of the Harry Potter section. We're just giving you little highlights through this tour of sections of the museum, and this is part of the Harry Potter exhibit. This is an original painting by Johnny Gruelle. You see what a top-end artist he was. He was a contemporary of Arthur Rackham. This is just a print over here, the Rackham. But the problem with Gruelle was that he became so successful. People remember him today not for his great art, but they remember him because of Raggedy Ann and Andy. It's sort of like Ravel when he wrote Bolero. People remember Ravel's Bolero, but they forget that he wrote all types of wonderful music. Well, with Johnny Gruelle, they remember Raggedy Ann and Andy, who are as popular today as they were when he first created them. In the 40s, 50s, and 60s, companies like NAPCO did wonderful little figurines for each of the months. And this will show you some of the wonderful ones that were done for Halloween, with the Halloween motif for them. Over here is one of the pieces, like this one over here. These were made for putting in your matches, your cigarettes. This was a time when people did a lot of whist parties and card parties and home parties. And it was a case of making fun of gambling, smoking, and drinking, because they knew all of them were wrong, but they did it anyways. It was a way of making fun of it. We seem to forget that there was no great epiphany by Sia and Coop one day, who thought the cigarette smoking was bad for us. James the First, who comes after Elizabeth the First of England, when he becomes king, he writes a book, The Counterblasts of Tobacco, why he bans it at court, how it's bad for your health. So we've always known that tobacco was bad for our health. Anyway, you have all of these things which were for matches, and they would have the gambling motif on them, the devil motif, the skeleton motif, connotating that they were not good for your health. This is the Scandinavian or Swedish Easter witches. The witches come at Easter time in Sweden. They light on your roof. They brew coffee. They bring prosperity to the home. Then they fly off to a mythical mountain called Blackula. They make some more coffee. They brew some stew, and they sing and dance. And then they fly home to their areas, their homes, and bring prosperity to their villages and where they come from. As these come to this country, part of the growth of and changing as we have people coming to this country from all the different areas of the world, they bring these Easter witches with them, and they become our kitchen witch. 3 pieces here. 2 of them are original, 1 is a reproduction. I want you all to decide which one is the reproduction. Unfortunately, there are a tremendous amount of reproductions on the market, and just fakes and phonies, and unfortunately a lot of people are taken. This particular one here is the reproduction, and one of the ways you can tell is you see the inside is so clean, and yet the outside has been made to look very, very old, where the other 2 are originals. Also, we've kept the original price tag from the person who made this on the piece, so that people will know that we're not, which piece it is if they're looking on their own. Down here are some of Flossie Fisher's funnies. Flossie Fisher always had a cartoon in the ladies' magazines with for the children's page, and it always had a jack-o'-lantern in them. The piece up here is one of my favorite pieces at the museum, and this is a witch candy container, an early one. And as you move the thing, she eats the cat, or she may disgorge the cat. And as I said, it's a candy container. They would have put the candy in here. These are bisque or china pieces. The ones at the bottom were for putting in lollipops or little candy packages into. They were made in Germany. This set also was made in Germany. It was a child's set. There are more pieces that go to the set, which we do not own. And above you'll see some of the little witch motif pieces, again, that were made sometimes for Hansel and Gretel, or the witch motif would show up both as a fun figure and as a scary figure or bad figure, and also as the good witch. We are very fortunate here at the museum to own over 40 pieces of Jack Rhodes' work. Jack is probably the foremost, definitely is the foremost artist working in this genre here in the United States. He's out of California. He's my favorite artist of all. And his work just seems to get better as he ages. And as I said, this is one of maybe over 40 pieces that we have. And this is our latest piece that we've gotten. There's such a charm and whimsy, bringing the old feeling of the old candy containers and toys, and yet such a completely modern change and look at the particular pieces. This piece is a reproduction. Actually, it's not really a reproduction because they never made one, original one. This is part of the items that have been coming out of Germany. And they're saying that these were pre-World War II, and they were sitting in East Germany in warehouses all the way through the communist regime. Not so. These are definitely cottage industry pieces. Right, this was one of the earliest pieces that they came out with, and I looked at it and I said, poster paint, this can't possibly be old, and yet everybody told me it was. And so I made one of my biggest mistakes in life. I put this in one of my books as an original, but it's a reproduction. And people should be aware that a lot of this stuff is coming out of Germany, and the sad part is, this is cottage industry, it's original designs. If they sign these pieces, because they are fairly limited, if they sign them and put the name of the person who was working on it and did the item, they would be worth money today. Candy is the basis of trick-or-treating today. This is one of the early candy molds that they would make the candy in and wrap in the foil papers. But down here you'll see some of the large chocolate molds, and also ice cream molds, lollipop molds, and there's a few lollipop molds on their original cards. And this is an industrial mold used for making the sugar skulls that would have been used for the Day of the Dead. Over here are two of the rubber molds that were used to make the plaster figures of like witches, and they did them in pumpkins and black cats. Robert Burns is the father of our holiday Halloween. And the reason we say this is because pre our Revolutionary War, Burns was up in the Highlands and the Lowlands going around into the far reaches of Scotland, going to the elderly people and asking them what they remember of Halloween celebrations way back when. And he gathered them together and wrote the poem Halloween. And this caused almost a rejuvenation, more so a renaissance of Halloween celebrations. But this was a time when the Celtic waves were starting to come to this country. The Scots, always marauders, had already gone down went into Ireland. They took their traditions with them into Ireland. That's where you get your Scots-Irish. But as they come into America, they bring the poem Halloween and its traditions, and they also bring the poem Tam O'Shanter with them. This was a time when most people were illiterate. Illiterate didn't mean that they were stupid. It just meant that they could not read because there weren't any books around. There was no reason to read or write, nor no time or opportunity. So people would memorize the poem Tam O'Shanter, which it takes place on Halloween night. Tam's wife has told him, no, you are not going to the pub tonight. He goes anyways, and he drinks with his friend Suther Johnny. And they tell ghost stories and have a merry old time. And as he's on his way home on his horse Maggie, he is going by the old church in Alloway, and the witches are having their revel, and they're singing and dancing. So he stops and he's looking in the window, or he's still sitting on his horse Maggie. And it's just a wonderful dance and music. And at the end of one of them, he gets very excited and applauds. Well, now they know he's there. They're aware of him, and they begin to chase him. And as they get up to the old brig, the bridge over the River Doon, which is not allowed to go over water for some strange reason, he gets onto the bridge, and just as he does, one of the witches reaches out and grabs poor Maggie's tail and pulls poor Maggie's tail off. And the moral of this story is I haven't the vaguest idea why poor Maggie has to pay the hindmost and lose her tail when she did nothing wrong, and Tam gets away scot-free. But it's a beloved poem, and people would recite it. They would have competitions, which we understand still go to this day. So you'll see images of Burns himself, the Halloween, Tam O'Shanter, and anything that is related to this. And they even did advertising pieces, but many, many pieces of Burns. But Burns is part of that Celtic wave. This is what the seed is that's brought to America, and it turns into a full-grown tree.
Okay.
An early etching from a scene from Robert Burns' poem Halloween. The Monster Pack for Hostess Cupcakes of the Munsters is one of two pieces that we have that is signed by Grandpa Munster, Al Lewis. This is the other piece, the A&W Munster's car that is signed by Grandpa Munster. These are by an artist called Debbie Thiebaud out of California. This particular piece that she did is called the Halloween Queen. I have the registered trademark for the Halloween Queen. Debbie came to me and asked if she could use it to make a figure of me. And you can see the resemblance between this figure and me. Two machines that were used in the diners for giving you your napkins, but if you wanted to choose, you could put in your 1 cent and get your fortune. We do warn people that this particular piece has been reproduced, and you have to be very careful because it's very difficult to tell the difference between the original and the copy. I know a lot of people remember this from the Twilight Zone, this particular piece here. This is also a fortune-telling machine, the Wizard. Again, this has been reproduced, and the way you can tell is the original. This is an original. The later ones were sand cast, and you can see the difference in, you don't have the definition. You get these almost like pock marks in the casting. We have many games here at the museum. People played games way back when rather than watching television and videos. And you see that there are many games where there are variations of the same game done over different periods of time. There were games that were done of all different periods. And of course, we have many of the tarot decks as you go through. Now there's the Dali Universal Tarot deck, which has now been reissued from what we hear. Some of the Ouija boards and board games that were done, and here's a pictorial review showing the little children, 12 Trees, the artist, their little children playing with the Ouija board. Ouija boards, we know, have gotten bad names because of some of the horror movies and stuff like that. I am a great believer that you get out of something what you put into it. If you're a bad person, you're going to get problems, and if you're a good person, you take with you your own baggage. Radio program Pot of Gold. There's a game that was done for Halloween or for fortune telling. You'll see the many different types of fortune telling games that there were for seeing the future, or most of these things were great fun type of things. The tarot decks, of course, were made for hundreds of years. And you'll find everything from here, from Edward Gorey to James Bond. There's a lot of fun motifs of them. The graphics on some of them can be extremely, extremely good. And also you see Le Miraculum over here. Two versions of the same game, but very, very different. They might have been done for different markets. They might have been done in different years, but all within the same era. Many people remember the movie Big, Tom Hanks in the movie Big. And this is a later version of the Zoltan machine, the fortune-telling machine that was made the young boy into a big in other words, adult person. This is our fortune-telling tent. And in here are all of the different types of fortune-telling, whether it's the runes, whether it's the tossing of the bones, the reading of the beans, phrenology, palmistry, astrology, the voodoo tap tables, and things that would be like used in spiritualism for levitation and contacting the spirits. It also includes many things that we are, because we are a social history museum, that we discuss that people think are fortune-telling related or Halloween related that aren't. This particular piece here is a Victorian mercury glass wig stand. It is not a witch's ball. The particular pieces that are hanging around above me, like this particular piece here, these are not witch balls either. These are kugels, and these kugels were used at Christmas time for hanging on the trees at Christmas. They were used for decorative reasons, but they were not for Halloween. They might use a large one like that to put in the windows, because they used to use candles back in those days, and the candle would reflect the light out into the street. It would also reflect the light into the house. It would also let people, like having your latchkey out, let people know that you were home. A witch ball has to have an opening in it. They would put dill inside of it. And it was sort of like a placation. It would be so that the spirits or the witches would come and they would eat the dill and they would be placated and they would leave the family alone. Sort of like leaving bread and milk out for the leprechauns or the fairies or the goblins or elves or whatever, or even leaving cookies and milk out for Santa Claus. It was a way of saying thank you for not bothering us, but also for your blessings and for not, feeling badly about us being here. This is my twin sister.
You come for a treat or for a trick?
I think it's a treat. This is Midnight Flake, which was tobacco, Virginia flake tobacco. This is how they used to sell tobacco, and they would be selling it in the stores. As you see, it has the traditional witch motif flying through the sky and the owls. It's one of those great product advertising. We have a lot of product advertising here because it's it's part of the social era of every century or every decade that will show how very different the graphics are and how they change and how they're indicative of the society and the mores of that era. Tin noisemakers were basically made here in America by companies like Kirchhoff. Here are some of the clickers, but they were done in very different forms. They did the horns, they did the rattles, the ratchet-type pieces. You'll see we have many, many different types of noisemakers, and later on as we get through the museum, you'll see some of the tambourines. The ones at the very top are three of the early parade lanterns. These were from 1908 and made in Toledo, Ohio. And the interesting thing about these is the fact that they were given away free when you purchased a pair of shoes in the shoe store. And I'm waiting for 1908 to come back so that I can go purchase some shoes. Two wonderfully carved wooden faces of the Green Man. The Green Man, these were made by a Kentucky artist that we met at a carving show. The interesting thing about the Green Man is of course, he was sacred to the Druids. It was the one motif that the church could not ban when they killed the Druids and they took over cut down the groves. they incorporated many things into Christianity and into the church. The one thing that they could not ban or incorporate in was the green man. But the people wouldn't tolerate it because the green man is so important. You'll see like the green man necklace that I wear. The green man was life. Winter comes, everything dies. If the green man doesn't come in the spring, or his equivalent, the female, because you have to have the yin and the yang, the Shilanagig, then you don't have spring. And if it's endless winter, we all die. So it was very important. So the church decided that though they couldn't condone it, what they would do is just completely ignore it. It didn't exist. It wasn't there. So as you go through the churches in England, you will see the green man faces on a lot of the columns, and up above you'll see these wonderful leaf tree type of, very much like Tolkien does the Ents. And these figures are the Genius Cucullatus, the bringing of life back to Earth after the long winter. They also show up on the Misericordia, which is the seats, on the sides of the seats. But it was one of those things, it wasn't there. They just turned their face, it didn't exist. This is my favorite piece of Jack Rhodes' work. This is a very large piece. It was a special that he made up for me. This is the Halloween Queen in Search of a Museum. He made this before I ever found the museum building. And it's just a very, very special piece. As you can see, he's made it out of not only the paper mache that he's so famous for, but recycled antiques that have been damaged and broken, and that's how the basis of his cart is. Inside it, you will see two of Linda Wolf's pieces, and here's a Raggedy Ann and Andy of the Linda Wolf's. And Linda is known for her wonderful hands and feet that are just absolutely so beautifully done. Two later Valentines, of course, one gets bewitched at Valentine's Day. That's what the love motif is. Saint Matrimony was the patron saint of Halloween. But the others are trade cards, pre-1900, that would be done. That motif was not used very often, the Halloween motif, or even Christmas motifs, because they wanted to be able to use these cards over and over. They were product advertising on the back. The interesting one is this particular one here, which is one of four that were done. It was done for the 1888 political campaign for the presidency. And it says that the Salem witches were going to vote a straight Republican ticket. Now, that might seem strange to many people that they were going to vote, all of the Salem witches were going to vote that way. And I always ask people, what do you think is wrong with that? And depending on whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, depends on what your answer is. But the real answer is that in 1888, women could not vote. And because they could not vote, they weren't going to vote for the Republicans or anybody. It took me many years of trying to understand, why did they do this card? Why does this one thing show up once? And I realized that in 1888, Susan B. Anthony actually endorsed the Republican Party. This is the party of Lincoln, which just starts with the first, Republican president. And they endorsed them for one reason. They were the only party that said that they would not oppose suffrage, where all of the others were against suffrage and would oppose it. These are some of my favorites. I love the napkins, the table covers and stuff that were made for parties back then, and we like them in the original packaging, especially if they have the original price tags on them. And you see how wonderful the graphics were. These were done by artists of the time, and there's a charm about them. There's something very delightful about the artwork. Today, with all our great technology and computers and stuff, this is about the caliber of the stuff that we get, which is not a great endorsement for our technology. These are some of the pieces done by a company or an artist called Hop Hop Jingle Boo. there's a charm to these because they're so very, very different. Great whimsists specifically love the star face and the silliness and almost goblinish feel to them. But there are some wonderful artists working out here in the field. You just be able to have to find them. And unfortunately, it becomes a case of a lot of these artists find it very difficult to stay in business and to make a living on it. And a lot of their work is being usurped by other companies and produced in China and other countries, and they're not making a cent out of it. And then people turn around and say, well, why should I buy your original artwork and pay money for this when I can buy a reproduction of it or something that's so similar and it's been a ripoff from that particular artist. These are 2 jelly bean boxes. They would be what they would be shipped in. These were commercial. They would be sent to the stores. Part of our social history, we can say here in America we have had a lot of prejudice, but it is part of the social history. The black people become the licorice jelly bean, and when you want an orange jelly bean, you turn the black people into orange people. This was an era of a lot of caricature, of making fun of other people. We seem to still have a lot of this prejudice lingering about, but at least we have banned a lot of it from being made and shown in this way. But it is part of the history of this country and the social history of everybody who is part of this country. I lose more money this way. This is a haunted house bank. And every time I put a penny there, the doors will open slowly, and he steals my penny. Washington Irving's story, Legend of Sleepy Hollow, has become an intricate part of not only Halloween, but the social history of New York State and America, how things were way back when. This was done in 1849, 1850 with Washington Irving's permission, and this contains the original pictures that he allowed the Union of Art students to produce for the book. Unfortunately, many pieces were not done for Sleepy Hollow, Legend of Sleepy Hollow with Ichabod Crane and the Headless Horseman. You do see a few pieces in here, a couple of carved pieces by Bouldry, and then of course with the Johnny Depp movie, Sleepy Hollow, which is a wonderful adaptation, very different from the original story of Sleepy Hollow. They did do a few toys, but not an awful lot. So for some reason, Sleepy Hollow just doesn't show up, or this Headless Horseman or Ichabod Crane on most things. Even with the Disney pieces, there are not too many things. Even when they did the Bing Crosby cartoon adaptation many years ago, and then what comes later on. This piece is Civil War period, and it's very fragile. We'll take the dome off so that you can see them. These were made with apples, and they're the 3 fates. And of course, during the Civil War, the 3 fates would have been very, very active cutting that string, which was the lifeline. Lanterns were made out of many things. Here's a watermelon with a glass nose. The early days of the automobile, where they used to wear chauffeurs' outfits with these long capes and stuff like this. You see the little people. These are some of my little favorite little pieces and stuff like that I just think have a life all of their own. This is a Scandinavian moon face. The moon face was used very much in the Scandinavian countries. These particular pieces were done in England, Thorne's Toffee, and you find almost nothing, the early period, that was ever done with the Halloween motif, and the thorns was just about the only thing you would find. We've always said that a lot of things are regional, so those would be, from other countries, but like the flamingos, these would have been done only, let's say, in an area like Florida, and these actually came up from Florida as a gift from a friend here to the museum. Early tops were a great favorite of children way back when, and you see on both of these two variations of the same thing, different colors and stuff, that the witch motif shows up. And she's always the haggard, hag-type figure. Many people are familiar with the Wizard of Oz because of the movie, you know, the bad witch and the good witch, you know, Glinda the good witch and the evil witch. But the movie was a much later thing. Both Baum, who was the originator of it, and Denslow, who he collaborated with, and they both worked on it separately by themselves at different times, used the witch motif. They had Mombi the witch. There was also Jack Pumpkinhead of Oz. But they also did things like the Pearl and the Pumpkin, where the Halloween type motif was used. Peter Pumpkin in Wonderland, where you have the anthropomorphic vegetables. So the witch motif was used. Up here is, Baum did a lot of original musicals on Broadway. And this is The Witch Behind the Moon. And you see this very evil type of witch with like almost like fangs, like a Dracula type figure. And it is very misogynistic. She's depicted as a black person. And it's very surprising that he has depicted people in this way, women in this way, because his mother-in-law and his mother were very heavy into the suffrage movement, and he himself was very heavy into the suffrage movement. But I think it becomes a case of this is what is demanded to sell a Broadway musical at the time. This was part of the mores and thought form of the time, so they would go along with it. Glass candy containers. This is how, you know, actually some of these would have candles in them. So you would go trick-or-treating, or else you would put your candy in them. But certainly with the Belle and the Witch, these were meant to be put candy inside of them. These are very difficult to find today. Below that, you see some of the early noisemakers. These were made with paper and wood and composition, like the ratchet types or shaker types. The original ones, these early ones, are always in bad condition because they were done with paper, and then they would put little stones on the inside. So the minute somebody shook it, the stones would go through the paper and tear them. So you always find little tears and stuff on most of that type of thing. The ratchet types, of course, would be shaken and make noise. And the reason for making noise was to scare off any evil spirits. Below that is some of Sonia Cunningham's work, very fanciful pieces. The Gottlieb Haunted House is one of the wonderful pieces of arcade machines that were done. And this is probably the heaviest and the biggest of them that they did. And it's done on 3 levels. And lit up, it's just a wonderful piece of graphics as well. Pumpkins are indigenous to North America. When the Celtic wave came over, they did not have pumpkins over there. What they would use is they would just dig out a little a hole in the mangel or the turnip or the beet and put a candle in it. When they came to America, of course, the pumpkin is here, and of course they grow so much larger. And then eventually the face develops, and you have that opening so that you can see more light. And it's usually the faces are very benign and funny and happy. But there are also the double-faced ones where you have laughing on one side or scowling on the other side, happy on one side, angry on the other side. Lucky Ghost is a part of this era of segregation. It was a black cast, black production for the black movie houses. Beneath that are 2 posters by Edward Gorey. Of course, Gorey did the Dracula for Broadway. We know of his work today, many people from Masterpiece Theater, but he was a prolific artist. A lot of his work was published through the Gotham Book Mart, and he is still very, very collected. His graphics are just wonderful, and it's very Gothic, and yet there's a whimsy, there's almost a silliness and a witticism to his artwork that is just wonderful, very tongue-in-cheek. One of my favorite artists. On the lower shelf, you'll see there's some of the Addams family, Morticia and Gomez. And there's also a Green Man figure here, a little humidor, and some of the early Halloween pieces that were done as well. The second shelf is basically vintage. We do mix our vintage and contemporary pieces together because of room and where they will fit. On this shelf here, you'll see in the back some of Deborah McMillan Nearing's Gothic paintings. Just wonderful contemporary artwork. Some of the bat motif. Of course, bats are being really endangered right now because of all of the white nose disease. And it's important that we study them and do stuff for them because they're what eats the mosquitoes and some of those horrible flying bugs that are so devastating to us. This is a Noritake piece with the witch motif on it, which is great fun. And again, you see a lot of the earlier candy containers, lanterns, some with bobbling heads, some with ears and noses. The next shelf here, again, is mixed. One of the owl figurines in the background, more of Deborah McMillan Nearing's pieces. This is a Jack Rhodes piece. Basically, these pieces here are vintage. This one here is one of the rare black motifs that you do find. In the back, you'll see more of Deborah McMillan Nearing's paintings. And this is a Jack Rhodes piece over here. This is a piece of Wedgwood Fairyland luster. And down here are 3 or 4 pieces by Salazar, the paperweight artist. And the round ones, of course, look like they're black, but they're actually cobalt blue. In the back again are 3 of Deborah McMillan Nearing's Gothic paintings. And then you see a couple of pieces of Wedgwood luster, Wedgwood Fairyland luster. This is a Wedgwood canopic jar. This is a Schaefer and Vada piece over here. A piece of Jack Rhodes' work. And then one of the early owl figures, which I really do love, is a lantern. A wonderful Green Man figure. And you see this is a nodding figure. And the Green Man is what we see as the figure that evolves into, if you see Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, the ghost of Christmas Present is the Green Man figure with the holly and the nests in his hair, with the robes and the bringing all of the prosperity that the Green Man brings. It's the life force. It's the perpetuation. So what was sacred to him was, and that the motifs that you would usually see would be the mistletoe, the evergreens that stay green all winter, and things like acorn. The Druids, and the Druids, these are original pieces actually from the Order of Druids that start up in Victorian times. Of course, the Druids were all killed off way back during the time of St. Patrick. So the Druids had reorganized in the time of, and one of their members actually was Winston Churchill. So you had a lot of prominent people who joined the Druids. So you see this motif of the Druid looking very much like the Green Man looking more like the illustrations from Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. The early Father Christmases always had wreaths of holly and mistletoe in their hair. You see this motif always with the evergreen type of thing in their hairs, which is, I think, wonderful. Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, of course, is to me the greatest Christmas story ever written. And it has the ghosts in it, and you see that ghost motif a lot in Christmas, like the bells and other things. The ghost sometimes is memory. So you have, Marley's ghost. Marley's ghost is the redeeming figure. Without Marley coming, and his friendship and his caring for Scrooge, the three ghosts would not be coming. So there's Marley there. And to the left over here is Befana. Befana is the Italian witch who comes at Epiphany. She was the one that brought the presents at Christmas at Epiphany. They brought the presents on January 6th rather than December 25th, which is the new Christmas rather than the old Christmas, which was January 6th. And Befana is very similar to the Russian figure Baba Yaga. She was, Baba Yaga in some ways was the good witch and the bad witch. When she was good, she was very good. When she was bad, she was horrible. But she was the one that brought the presents at Christmas time. When Stalin comes along, he bans Christmas presents and Christmas, and it becomes New Year's where the gift giving is given, and it becomes Father Frost who brings it. But in earlier days, it was the witch figure who brought the presents. Befana, the Italian witch, or strega, wise woman, who would bring the presents at Epiphany. Tambourines, again, were part of the noisemakers that were done. You see the Mother Goose motif up here. Down here is the gypsies, because, you have the fortune telling that comes from the gypsies. That tambourine usage was also very much a part of the levitation during spiritualism and seances. Contemporary pieces by an artist, Rick Conant, who's associated with Broadway. These are all signed by Rick. These pieces have been picked up and without his permission, modified and produced elsewhere. So you have to be really careful to make sure that you're getting an original Rick Conant piece. Spook Show was very much a part of the movie traditions when they had B movies, and you could go in and spend a lot of time at the movies and watch movies over and over and over. But they always had the spook shows around Halloween, and it was always the ghost type of stories, and great fun with a lot of background music and a lot of silliness and dancing. What would Halloween be without Charlie Brown waiting in the pumpkin patch, waiting for the great pumpkin, in the very sincere pumpkin patch? This is an original cell with Charlie waiting in the pumpkin patch. This is my husband's favorite section here, Charlie Brown and Snoopy. And I think Schultz brings out the ultimate child in us all. This is a Norwegian troll. This would have been a store display. We're not quite sure where this came from. We purchased it at an auction years ago. But he's just a wonderful piece. And recently we bought the small little troll underneath him so that when he needs to have errands run, because he's out of our Genius Cucullatus, he's out Green Man, he's the protector of the museum, then he can send this little servant off doing his little jobs that he doesn't want to go clodding off to do. Some of the 40-plus pieces of Jack Rhodes' work. Jack is very one of those artists that there are so many people waiting for his work. There's been museum displays of his work, retrospects. He is the most important folk artist of his genre working today. This is a Shone Hunt roly-poly piece. This, unfortunately, they did not make these. This is probably a prototype. You also see the Kiro Magica game here. Two very different renditions of the same game. This is a very early piece, and I just absolutely love this because you don't see this type of thing. And he does his little dance here. And he's made out of old cloth, and this is an early piece and wood. Now, this is one of those little crank-up type pieces, and he plays the drum, and again, a little, stay there, mister, a little, much like a Morris dancer with bells. And again, the bells that the Morris dancers use at Christmas time are to ward off evil spirits as well, and also to welcome in the good ones and the Christmas and the New Year spirits. In this case, you'll also see things like centerpieces and party groupings, so that you wouldn't have to go out and buy just the napkins separate, the table cover separate, and it would become a case of you would have, let's see if we can get that over there. You would have them already there. There's a Dennison one, here's a Halloween party mailbox here, and some of the great pieces in there. Wonderful owl lantern over here. One of the many games that we have here at the museum. And this, of course, this predates most of us. This is from the newspaper comic strips, The Yellow Kid, which most of us do not remember. Jack Frost is what brings us our autumn colors. So you see Jack Frost coloring the fall foliage. He also brings the actual frost, the cold, which turns the tree leaves on the trees. So Jack Frost is one of the images, and the sprites of the forest that are his friends that help turn the forest into those beautiful reds and oranges and yellows and give us the incredible autumn colors. These autumn sprites, some of them are made of from the Dennison patterns out of crepe paper and pipe cleaners. Others are made by some of the commercial companies like NAPCO that were very prominent back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. The Green Man piece here is a piece by Jack Rhodes, and you see the wonderful, not only the leaves coming out of the face, but also the nuts. This is a commercial picture frame, but a wonderful Green Man face on it, and another piece of Jack Rhodes, and I love the fact that it shows the bats on it. Remember the 5th of November, gunpowder and treason and plot. Guy Fawkes has absolutely nothing to do with Halloween, though many people have said, and it's come up in books and on television programs that it does. It's part of English history. Guy Fawkes was trying to blow up the Houses of Parliament. The plague was on in London. Everybody had fled London, so they had gone up towards York. They were going to convene Parliament with the opening with the king, but they kept on postponing it because everybody was afraid of the plague. And Guy Fawkes and his friends had decided to blow up the houses, and they had put gunpowder underneath the building, but it kept on getting wet, so they kept on replacing it. Well, they caught him, and they tortured him and did all those wonderful civilized things. And what happened is, at the end, they burnt him. Well, once you've burnt a person, you can't do it again the next year. That's what effigy means. Because they're using a mask, doesn't mean that it has anything to do with Halloween. It's as logical as my saying that really it's our 4th of July because they're using fireworks. One has absolutely nothing to do with the other. The Ballyhoo magazine was done in 1937. How frightening it must have been to land up on somebody's porch looking at Mussolini, Hitler, and Hirohito. It would have been, very, very frightening for people in those day and age. But you could have done a little bit of sympathetic magic, blow out the candle, smash the pumpkin, and destroy the enemy. But this is, part of the history of the time, and the tyrants and the evil ones of their time landed up on jack-o'-lanterns. Scary. Ghoulies and ghosties and long-legged beasties and things that go bump in the night. Good Lord, deliver us. This is part of the Cornish or Devon litany. This is part of the Celtic wave that comes to this country and part of the traditions that they bring to our country. The other items in the case, some of them are games, some of them are pieces that you would find great fun fantasy pieces and historical pieces. We have over 100 pieces of sheet music here related to Halloween at the museum. You notice that there's the Baba Yaga over there with the witch on it, the witch's whirl waltz, Ouija boards. There's one on spiritualism, the Gypsy Tea Room, witchcraft with Frank Sinatra singing it. So the wizard and the jack-o'-lantern and the Ouija board, all of these motifs show up on Halloween sheet music. We got that. The use of witches and devils and mystical motifs show up on a lot of product advertising. Witch hazel for creosol. Here's a tin for the Three Witches tobacco. There's a peanut butter tin in here. You have a lot of bottles that show the witch motif. And the idea was that you had these supernatural, they were so good because they weren't just regular. They had all this supernatural help. They had the help of the witch or the devil or the wizard or something that was beyond our power to get things clean or fix something. So you get this motif a lot, and certainly you also have it with the Salem witch pieces like the milk bottles and the smelling salts. Two pieces in the center are Rose O'Neill's Cupies. The Cupid doll or the Cupid was very, very popular back from like 1920s on. These are actual pieces. There's another piece in there, but that was done by the club later on. There are other pieces in this case, like the Snow Babies that were done by an Ohio artist, and another one of the Lada Yurchenko watercolors. There are so many candy containers and vintage pieces here at the museum. This gives you an idea of some of the pieces that we particularly like. You see the jack-o'-lantern faces. Some people call them Dresden. I call them little candy boxes. But they always have that wonderful German jack-o'-lantern face on them. And they did many different forms of these. And very often you'll see these hanging on people's trees. But the black cat, the pumpkin, the owl. There's so many motifs that are part and parcel of Halloween, but they all integrate as part of the whole of Halloween. My Haunted Castle was a game made in New Hampshire. It's a very scarce game. The artist has signed and personalized the contents of the box for us. And above it, you see one of the jigsaw puzzles that we'll also do it. We have just gotten the original artwork for this, which we're going to be framing and bringing down here to the museum in the near future. The museum is always adding things and incorporating new things into the museum, so the museum changes at all times. These are pieces by Rebecca Venable of the Cobweb. You see there are all these wonderful little fantasy items, a lot of fussy little detail, wonderful bits. And then in the back you see some of her Mexican Day of the Dead skulls that she made, and they're all so very, very different. The nice thing about folk artists is that no two pieces that they ever do are the same. More of the wonderful fantasy pieces of Jack Rhodes. I particularly like the one of the little pumpkin men sitting in the arbor, under the arbor, eating their pumpkin soup. You see how very different each of his pieces are. Product advertising is very dated. You see the padded shoulders on her dress, Falstaff beer. In here we have many pieces that, this is a UNICEF piece with Mighty Mouse. Some more UNICEF pieces. Another Rheingold beer, again, the same type of dress with the girl in green, Rheingold beer. This particular piece and this particular piece are the original artwork that Denison used to make their crepe paper. Because we have so many pieces and we have not had a chance to bring down, we're working on the museum all the time. Eventually the original crepe paper will be brought down to show the crepe paper that they produced with the original artwork. Most people will not recognize her because she's so young at this time. Most people will think this is a little boy. But if you look at the eyes, she's a very famous actress today, and her mother and father were very, very prominent in the theater. And that's a very young Liza Minnelli. This is one of the two Victory Garden posters that we have. You'll see the anthropomorphic figures of the vegetables, the pumpkin and the beets and the potato, earth figures that were so prominent. And we always bring out the fact that at the White House, they always had a garden until not that long ago. And now we have a garden back at the White House, which we're very, very happy about that Michelle Obama has done that. And I'm sure the ghost of Abigail Adams, who was the first lady at the White House to live in the White House and who had a garden there, and also Dolly Madison, who is very proud of her gardens, will be very happy to know that the gardens are back. This is how the tarot decks would have been printed, and that's still printed, the part of the printing process, and then they would have been cut on the guillotine or on the presses. But this is the part of the tarot deck. a contemporary poster which will show you some of the Green Man images that are found in the different cathedrals in England. Spell soap. This is part of a display of Spell. You see the magic. This is the only way you can get your laundry clean. This comes out of England and is part of, as I said, part of a display. But it's the magic action, which is the only way you can get your laundry clean. The Disney movie Nightmare Before Christmas by Tim Burton and Danny Elfman is one of my all-time favorite movies. And this is our Nightmare Before Christmas section. This is where Jack and Sally live. We have done it as a very Christmassy type area, but the motifs are going to be witches and goblins and ghosts and stars, and they range from folk art to contemporary, to back to Victorian times and even earlier. This is a mixture of things that we think Jack and Sally would be very happy to have in their home, and their friends, and maybe the denizens of Halloween Town. Now over here, you will see two pieces, two early Christmas ornaments, both Victorian. These are blown. And they are very, very fragile. They are jack-o'-lantern faces. They used to put this type of thing on the Christmas trees. The motif of the jack-o'-lantern goes all the way through the holidays, through the new year. These, as I said, both of them are blown. And the one in the back here, the top of it would have been broken off, but this one was never broken off so that they could hang it on the tree. So it is complete as it would have been back in Victorian times before they sold it. And this one here had a very delicate little tinsel handle, but because it's so old, the tinsel has come off, and because it's so fragile, we're afraid to put it back on. In the back, you'll see some of the later Christmas ornaments, and down below here, there are some of the Christmas light bulbs that they did, many of them from the occupied Japan era. The organ pipes here were done by John Marino, an artist from New Hampshire. He's depicted scenes from Nightmare Before Christmas. We also have one with the Harry Potter designs that he did. We have other pieces by him. He was one of our favorite artists years ago. And there's a great whimsy with him. And it's wonderful how the artists have used old materials like these organ pipes, and nobody uses this type of thing today, and they've recycled them and made them into something wonderful and exciting. This is the Harry Potter one, which eventually will be moved down to the Harry Potter section. Jack and Sally have been very happy to allow other people to come and live with them here. Oogie Boogie is in the back, but here's Santa Claus, and the reason we've kept the Santa Claus outfits is that Jack is always borrowing Santa's outfits. And you see, Sally thought it would be interesting if Santa wore a mask and they became part of a Halloween Town when he came to visit. So he's wearing an elephant's mask. An elephant, of course, never forgets, and Santa never forgets who's naughty and who's nice. Trees are wonderful to decorate with Halloween items. We have everything on them, from owls to candy corn and black cats and devils and witches and pumpkins, vintage pieces to contemporary pieces, folk art pieces, and of course lights. Of course, we don't put lights on the tinsel trees because they can cause accidents, fires. And this is an old tinsel tree. But we use the trees here to decorate and show off some of the wonderful fantasy items that have been produced. And they're, as I said, large pieces and small pieces and witches and just wonderful things. And of course, a lot of Nightmare Before Christmas decorations, because this is the Nightmare Before Christmas section of the museum. We do have other magical creatures. You'll see a Tinkerbell here and just a generic witch somewhere else, and It's just a fun fantasy type of area. Again, you'll see some of the wonderful Christmas ornaments with some Radcos. This is Debbie Thebo. We saw the ornament, the candy container that she made earlier. This is one of her glass ornaments that she made of me. Again, you can see the resemblance between the two of us. All types of wonderful little fantasy figures and stuff, ghosts and monsters and vampires and just wonderful little pieces, people in a flying boat with a jack-o'-lantern, little folk art pieces of Jack made out of pipe cleaner, which are great fun, skeletons, and just a plethora of wonderful images. Another Jack piece that's dressed up in a very strange little purple hatted item, but it's this is the autumn. So we tried to pull out all of the great colors of autumn and keep a feeling of how the harvest holiday goes from Halloween all the way through the new year. Jean Taylor, Abraham Kokorian, and myself have tried to give you an image of some of what you're going to see here at the museum. Of course, we couldn't put all of this on video, but we hope that it has entertained you. We hope that it has made you salivate and want to come here to the museum and to see the social history and some of the wonderful artifacts, some of them historical, some of them contemporary, but we have a tremendous amount of great art and a lot of fantasy here. As you see, we are a social history museum. We can't emphasize that enough. We are not a haunted house. We do not sell costumes or anything else. What is here at the museum stays at the museum. We are always accepting things for the museum. We are always purchasing things from the museum and working on the museum. So we're very happy to invite you into the museum and make you part of a wonderful world of Halloween fantasy and the peripheral, those things that have affected it over the many years. Wanted to decorate it. Well, Dennison would tell you how much crepe paper that you needed to produce that particular piece so that it would fit you or whoever you were making it for. And then it was up to you to decorate it with the different decorations and stuff, how you prefer to have it. But this was the teacher's box. Another one of the crepe paper dresses, and you see the tears in them. These were never meant to last, and the fact that they have lasted and been kept is really amazing. Every single piece of these were made individually by a person, so they were so completely individualized. Face jugs were originally done for keeping moonshine in, moonshine being the devil's own drink. You had to have something scarier than the devil himself to keep him from stealing your moonshine. It was also good for the temperance people and the prohibitionists and anybody else who had designs against your moonshine. Basically, they were made in Georgia, and then afterwards they were made in other states. But they had become a complete art form, Southern art form, which is absolutely magnificent. The original ones were made with a tobacco spit glaze, but today many of the artists have just, gone through with their fancy and done all types of things from aliens to animals, all types of scary figures, a lot of snake motifs, things that would be scary or that they felt were scary. Of course, we have red glazes and blue glazes and mixed glazes, which I think is wonderful. Above, you'll see some of the faces that were done also with the pottery by the Southern potters. Some of them a mixture of non-glazed and glazed. Above that, you'll see some of the voodoo paintings that were done in Haiti. These are, we think of voodoo as being the, the zombie movies and all these silly stuff that comes on the movies, which are great fun, but it has absolutely nothing to do with voodoo. This is basically a case of a mix. Welcome to Castle Halloween Museum. This is the old Boggs Run School, which is on Boggs Run Road. It is a 3-story brick building with gargoyles on the roof. It is now the home of the Castle Halloween Museum, which is open all year long. For appointments for tours, call 304-233-1031 or email us at castlehalloween@comcast.net. Most of the flowers now for the season have just about faded because it's just a few days away from Halloween 2012. But we are open all year long. We do our seasonal displays, as well as having a permanent collection of Halloween on tap all year long. We hope that you will come visit the museum. It is an experience you will probably never have anywhere else because it is the only Halloween museum in existence. It is a true museum. We are not a haunted house. We are a social history museum, and the eye candy is absolutely delicious. Welcome to the museum. 2 original paintings here are by Angel Dominguez. They are in the Diary of the Victorian Mouse. You will also find the Stonehenge one in my book on Stonehenge. And the cover here, the original photograph, is up there in the corner. Beyond here on the thing, you'll find a lot of the original voodoo flags that would have been in the family homes along here. These are all made of sequins and beaded, and all hand beaded, and all individual ones. These are some of the ones that we have framed up and are now on them, and they were really used for only one season, one wearing and then tossed away because they would get torn, have food spilt on them, and as I said, perspiration was another problem. This is one of my favorite sections and one of the best sections of the museum as far as I'm concerned, which is the Memento Mori. In here you'll find a tremendous amount of the hair wreaths of all different calibers and sizes. This one here, it has actual birds and butterflies actually in the hair wreath, not just flowers, which was common. The hair wreaths were memento mori, memories of the dead, but they were not only just done in hair, they were done in other media like feathers, which would say our darling, which would be usually for a baby, newborn baby that died in infancy. The wax flowers, and there were other media that were done. Also, you would see things like the Victorian die cuts, which we have quite a few of. This is an interesting one because it's a group of a family. You would see a family register, like on this one over here, which would be the dates of death of the people and also small bits of hair for different members of the family. The crypt here is a combination of Memento Mori and Day of the Dead, the sacred and the profane, the profound and the ridiculous. We have watercolors in here. We have important pieces of Memento Mori, including a lot of the jewelry that we have in the case, which would show, have a lot of the hair in the case, in the pieces of jewelry, But the jewelry wasn't just made in with hair. They did them in daguerre, like in the daguerreotype cases. They would do them with pictures, like in this one here, which has a photograph underneath, like the bracelet had a photograph. They did them in coal. They did them in jet. So anything basically that was black or part of the person who had passed on. You see the bracelet with the snakes on it that has been wound. So the degree and the how well the weaving was done was made a lot of difference of value and collectability and survivability of those particular pieces. In here we have the many Day of the Dead pieces as well, the Mexican Day of the Dead, and on display. What you're seeing now is part of our costume exhibit. We have over 1,000 costumes in stock on exhibit here at the museum. We show most of the really interesting boxes, you know, pre-flame proof and post-flame proof. And the interesting part is when the box matches the costume itself, or the character itself. A lot of the later boxes, especially with Collegeville, become very generic. You see a couple of the really big over-the-head costumes. These are really quite fun. Later on, as we go through, you'll see some of the cloth costumes and some of the crepe paper costumes that were done with using Denison's crepe paper and the accoutrements and decorations that Denison would make and sell through the Bogey Book, which cost 10 cents. One of the cloth costumes that was made and the paper decorations on it are probably sold by Denison or one of the other companies for decorative purposes, usually for invitations and stuff. But these particular paper ones were made put on the cloth costume. These are two original paintings by Bonnie White. Many people are familiar with her work from the Hallmark stores and other stores where her prints and calendars and greeting cards are sold. The hair wreath is one of many that we have. As we get into the crypt, you'll see a lot more of them. These were memento moris. They would have been made of the human hair of the person who passed away, friends and relatives and whatever else. Victorian times, these were usually kept in the parlor, which was saved for good, or for when company was there, Sundays. And these would go on the mantle so that when people came to visit, they would be able to visit the entire family, even those who had passed on, through the memento mori that had been left behind. The crepe paper was sold by a company called Denison. This is one of their dresses, and you can see how it's decorated. And this is one of the aprons that they would make up using the Denison pieces and stuff like that. Unfortunately, these did not survive very well because this is done pre-deodorant, and people would spill stuff on. At the top over here, there is one of the Potter photographs, prints, surrealism at its best. But there are all different types in here. And as I said, we celebrate both the sacred and the profane. So we try to make it light and fun in here. There are certain pieces that are very scarce. The clock over here was done by the tombstone maker. It's set at the time that the person would have passed away, and you'll see within the clock part, there's all these brown pieces and stuff. This would have been leaves and stuff from the funeral, and of course, well over 100 years old, so that they've deteriorated over the years. Our Day of the Dead collection, I think, is quite fun. And also we have things like this particular piece here and the goblet that's in one of the cases are from the Skull and Crossbones Society of the Yale University. Our Pirates Bar began as a joke with one bottle of vampire wine and one bottle of hobgoblin beer. But with the proliferation of many microbreweries and companies making things for the holidays, we get a lot of different bottles with wonderful graphics on some of them. So the bar has just become overwhelming and gotten very, very big. This is the original artwork for the killer tomatoes. This artwork becomes what you see on the box and the actual mask there. Underneath are the different layers of how masks are made and produced. And these, like the Garfield one, becomes these here. You see how on this one the eyes aren't even cut out. It becomes a question of they have to go back and forth, make decisions on how best to produce it, and this is what eventually will come out of it. In this box, we talked about Denison. That would have the bogey books for 10 cents. Well, for another 10 cents, you could take one of their classes. Now, this is for a little tomato, but you could do it as a blueberry, you could do it as a pumpkin, and depending on how you